Good evening. I welcome all of you to the 43rd lecture of Archaeological Sciences Center webinar series of IIT Gandhinagar. I welcome our distinguished guest today, Professor Susmita Basu Majumdar, and I really thank her for sparing her valuable time. She has been traveling for the past few days, and she is very kind enough to agree to deliver a talk for this month. I request Professor Michel to say a few words, initial comments, then I'll request Omkar to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Professor Prabhakar. And I'm very happy that we have Professor Susmita Basu Majumdar with us. She's a very distinguished epigraphist and historian of ancient India. And she has many skills, not only of language, but also of scripts. She is fluent in Sanskrit and Prakrit, and also in the scripts that convey those languages. And she happens to have done quite a lot of research on ancient inscriptions, especially of the time of Ashoka. So she has very original thoughts and perspectives to share. And it is, in fact, the second time that we are hosting her at IIT Gandhinagar. Since a few years ago, she came in person for a special lecture on women in ancient inscriptions. So with these few words, I'll request Professor Susmita ji to take over and deliver her talk. And then at the end, we will have, I'm sure, a very interesting sessions of questions and answers. Thank you.
Before that, I'll request Omkar to introduce the speaker. Omkar.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 43rd lecture of the ASC webinar series. It's my pleasure to introduce our esteemed guest, Professor Susmita Basu Majumdar. Professor Majumdar is a distinguished professor at the University of Calcutta, specializes in epigraphy and numismatics with keen interest in cultural history, religious history, and the history of medicine and surgery. She is also well conversant with ancient languages like Sanskrit and Prakrit. She has gained numerous prestigious fellowships and accolades both nationally and internationally. Her research endeavor includes meticulous cataloging of coins in renowned museums such as the British Museum and the Allahabad University Museum, among many others. And her scholarly contributions are extensive with numerous seminal works to her credit, including publications like Local Coins of Ancient India, Essay of the History of Medicine, and Morians in Karnataka, and more. Over more than 50 articles published in esteemed journals and books, Professor Majumdar works continues to enrich our understanding of ancient Indian history and culture. Today, she will be shedding light on recent researches regarding Emperor Ashoka, offering fresh interpretations of the sources on him and his reign. Before we delve into the talk, I extend my heartfelt thanks to Professor Majumdar for sharing her time and expertise with us today. Ma'am, we can begin with the slides.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. And a very good evening to all of you. Thank you, Professor Michel Danino, for giving me this opportunity to present this talk in front of all of you. And big thanks goes to Professor Prabhakar and Sharda for helping me out with everything. So I would like to extend my thanks to IIT Gandhinagar for allowing me to talk on this platform for the second time, which is really of immense pleasure to me. And as you can see, today I'll be talking on a topic which is Piyadasi Alias Asoka, recent researches. So talking about Ashoka, I would actually like to share that till date, if there is any one emperor on whom maximum books and articles have been written in the Indian history, that is always Ashoka. And ever since our school days, or even in the graduation level, post-graduation level, in every level, we have at least some portions on Ashoka. But still, there are several things which we do not know about him. So it's not only about knowing him, but the way we have seen him and how things have been changing in the perspective recently. That's what is the main focus of this lecture today. So before that, you might see that the title says it's Piyadasi Alias Asoka. So we will also focus on that. What was his name exactly? But before I delve into the whole issue, let me tell you that all of us are aware of the fact that the first emperor who had under him almost the whole of the Indian subcontinent, right from Afghanistan till Karnataka, and especially in the east up to the eastern coast, that is Odisha coast, and in the west up to the western coast, that is when you look at Gujarat and also Maharashtra. So you see that his empire was totally from northwestern part of the subcontinent till the southern part of the continent. And he also established contact with the far south, that is the peninsular southern tip. So he was a person who had actually brought out the whole of the Indian subcontinent into a single unit. So whenever we look at the researches of Ashoka, there are two very important points. How he actually united the whole empire by using a particular language, which has been the lingua franca, that is Prakrit, or to be precise, it's multiple Prakrits. So by uniting the whole empire with a kind of a language, he initiated a kind of a process of unification. And other than that, though we have certain edicts in the northwest, which are in Greek and Aramaic, where actually Prakrit was not used. So we have certain places where different languages have been used, but that's in a very small segment. Rest of the empire, we find him using a single language. So in different dialects, of course. So this is something which is very important. And the second thing which united the whole of the Indian subcontinent was a single system of coinage. So the whole of the Indian subcontinent was using a particular coinage, which is called the Pantma coins, but of a typical variety, which is imperial and specific to the Mauryans. So this was another way of uniting it. Though we know that already this was in vogue, all the process was going on of the unification, use of punch marks and an imperial type. This has already started with the Magadhan Empire, but during the Mauryans, we find it as a very comprehensive kind of a system, very highly complex. So this is the process of unification. Now, when you look at the map which is in front of you, you can see that all the inscriptions are actually laid out throughout the maps, and there are multiple colors which have been used. So the red ones are the earliest ones. I'll just make it very simple for my communication. That is, when you look at the Ashokan inscriptions, they are very typical, same or similar kind of the texts have been given in multiple copies throughout the empire. So when you look at the edicts of Ashoka, you have the same kind of text, and also the style is very unusual, and the emperor is actually giving kind of his moral proclamations, his religious sentiments. He's just communicating this also through his edicts, and he's speaking in first person, which is again very interesting. So he's also using multiple languages and multiple scripts, and this multilingual strategy has been actually derived from the Achaemenid model. So when we look at the whole of the Ashokan edicts, we find that they can be divided into two major categories. The first one are on large boulders. So these are the ones which we call rock edicts, and the others one are on the pillar, which we call pillar edicts. So these are the general kind of information on which I'll just try to shape up the things and also try to update what's happening in the Ashokan studies. And among these, we have to just remember that he began by engraving the minor rock edicts. In the minor rock edicts, we usually find a kind of a proclamation where he is mentioning that I have been a Buddhist slave follower, but I have not exerted much for the sake of Buddhism, and I have gone for a pilgrimage for 256 nights, and now I have engaged myself into promotion of Buddhism. Like, this is the kind of the statement. So he's exerting himself, or he's being zealous So this is found all over the Indian subcontinent, and these are dispersed. So there's no scheme in this, but it has been engraved everywhere. Now, the last in the series are the pillar edicts. So this is what we have to remember while listening to the talk, that initial ones, the minor edicts, are found everywhere, and the pillar edicts are only found in a certain area, which was the area of the metropolitan, like these are the last ones. So when you look at the major edicts are a set of 14 which are found on the borders of the emperor, so borders of the empire. And something very interesting, when you look at this map, you can see you have two sites, Shahbazgari and Manshera, which are in Pakistan. Then you have two sites in the western part of the subcontinent, which is Girnar and Sopara. And in the south, you find Sannati and Eragudi. And in the eastern limit, like eastern part of the empire, you find Dhali and Jaugar. So this distribution gives us a kind of a pattern that every border, like northeast, southwest, and northwest, had a set of two centers, two major power centers, and there the edicts were actually engraved. So when you look at the site of Kalsi, it's a standalone site. So this is the northern limit of the Ashokan Empire, but definitely there was a twin for Kalsi, which we have lost. So sometime maybe in future, we might find an Ashokan inscription somewhere near Kalsi. So this is a kind of a pattern where we find the emperor is actually communicating to his borderers. When you enter the kind of the empire, you feel the presence of the emperor through the edicts. So he was actually trying to talk about his own views and give the whole idea. Now, actually, here comes the question. Which Ashoka are we talking about? Who is this Ashoka of the Ashokan edicts? So one Ashoka is the person whom we know through his edicts, like whom we know through the inscriptions. The voice of the emperor tells us about one person who is Ashoka. Now, when you look at the other Ashokas, they are totally different from the voice of the edict. So, there are multiple Ashokas. When we look at the Sri Lankan Buddhist chronicles, which were written after almost 300 years, like over a period of half a century, so we find a different kind of an image of this emperor. So these are different voices. When we look at the Buddhist texts in Sanskrit from North India, like Ashokavadan, which has been written like 2nd century CE, again a long gap after Ashoka, they give us an idea about a different emperor. And when we look at the Brahminical Purans and other texts, so this is again another kind of a emperor. So we have to remember while we look at the sources that these are all different. So the nearest to Ashoka actually is the Ashokan edicts, where you are actually finding the voice of the emperor. So this is the site of Maski. For the first time here we came across the word Ashoka, and then we could attribute the edicts to the emperor. Now, when I say this, something very interesting is that the Ashokan studies actually began with the decipherment of Brahmi. So once Brahmi was actually deciphered, then we knew about these inscriptions, which began with Devanang Piyadasi Raja and so on and so forth. But who was this king? We did not know. Until and unless in 1915, when the site of Maski was found by C. Beeden, who was actually looking for gold in this area, it was a chance discovery that we found this edict of Ashoka. And this is the edict of Ashoka on your screen. And you can see here we have the name of Ashoka. Here you can see this. And then we could actually identify that this Devanang Piyadasi Raja is actually the same as Ashok. So instantly we got a name which we could relate to the other sources like the Ashokavadan, like the Sinhalese text, Buddhist text, where Ashoka has been mentioned. But we have not thought about it because, as I said, which Ashoka are we talking about? The ruler who for the first time thought of communicating his ideas to the subjects at length by directly addressing them, mentioned his name as Ashoka only. I stress upon this word only on 4 occasions. So a person who's actually thinking of communicating to his subjects and not mentioning his name is something which we should actually think about. Now let us see which are the 4 places where we get his name. So a person who's writing from Magad, that is with his capital at Patna, modern day Patna in Bihar, he is trying to communicate his name as Ashoka only at Maski, Nittur, and also at Urigala. So these are the places where you are getting his name, And there is another place which is in Madhya Pradesh, that is Gujarat, where you are getting this. So other than Madhya Pradesh, rest of the 3 sites which I am talking about are in Karnataka. So which is very, very far from the region of Magadha. So he's only mentioning his name down south in Karnataka, which is something we have to think. Then the final thing which comes to the limelight is that when we have a comparative statement from the edicts of Ashoka himself, we find that Devanang Piya, this word, which is an epithet, has been used 284 times in the records, whereas the name Priyadarshi or Piyadasi has been used 189 times and Ashoka only 4 times. And still we prefer to call him Ashoka. We have to really think why. Why are we calling him Ashoka when he himself would not like to be called Ashoka? And remember that these 4 mentions of Ashoka are only found in the minor rock edicts. That is his initial edicts where he's only mentioning that I have not been very zealous for promotion of Buddhism, and now it has only been 1.5 years that I have become a lay upasaka and I'm trying to promote Buddhism. So there we find this mention of the name Ashoka, and rest we do not find this. So it's only in the Buddhist context that we find this name. So he, of course, had 2 names. One is Priyadarshi and the other is Ashok. He only preferred to use Priyadarshi because that is the name which he's using in each one of his official communications other than the minor edicts. So it's very much obvious that he would have preferred Ashoka. So the latest book on Ashoka by Patrick Oliver, he says that Ashoka was not King's preferred name. He liked to call himself, and Patrick says, I think, like others, to call him Piyadasi. So I have been actually saying this for the last few years, and I'm really happy that Professor Oliver comes up with this whole idea again. So we really have to think that we should call him Piyadasi and not Ashoka. So it should be Piyadasi Alias Asoka. Ashoka was a Buddhist name meaning non-sorrow or someone who is bereft of sorrow. And he was not a Buddhist by birth, so he would not have this name. But whereas when we look at Piyadasi, it should have 2 kind of meanings: seeing of what is dear or a dear sight, or pleasant or benign countenance. So of course we'll go with this. Now, as I said, that it is 4 verses, 189, 4 times Ashoka and 189 Piyadasi. I will not go into the details of this, but I'm not the first one to say this. Already scholars have been talking about it when D.R. Bhandarkar mentions Priyadarshi as the epithet of Ashoka, which was not his epithet, It was definitely his name. B.L. Mukherjee mentions that it was his second name of Ashoka. So it was not his second name, it was his first name, definitely. And now look at his inscriptions, where we get the statement that his name was Piyadasi. There's an important site, which is Pangara in Madhya Pradesh. Here we get directly the phrase Piyadasi Naam Raja. So Piyadasi was not an epithet because Ashoka's grandson Dasharath, he uses Devanang Piya, which is the epithet, and then directly he says that his name is Dasharatha. So Devanang Piyena Dasalathena. So definitely this is the pattern. And Ashoka also says Devanang Piya Piyadasi. So this pattern becomes very clear. And finally, when we look at the Greek and the Aramaic edicts, something very interesting, every time they translate every word, but they do not translate Piyadasi because they don't want to translate the name. So Piyadases or Priyadash is the word which we get for the name of the ruler in the Greek and the Aramaic ethics. So definitely I've shown you. Now I would like to show you the site of Pangara, which is in the Sehor district. It's called the Sarumaru Caves, and this is the cave site of Pangara. And here, when we look at the inscriptions, there are two different inscriptions. The minor rock edicts is the green one here, and there is another inscription up there. So these are two different inscriptions altogether, because minor rock edict is a kind of edict which I've already mentioned about the 256 knight store. And now let me talk about the inscription which is high up there. This reads, Piyadasi Namaraja Kumarasa Samvasa Manemadeshe Upanitha Viharayakare. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the language, but I would like to mention that when DC Sarkar read this inscription, he translated it as follows: the king named Priyadarshin. Mind it, he says the king named Priyadarshin to Kumara Samva from his march of pilgrimage to Upanitha Vihara, that is monastery in Manevadesh. Now, the concept of Vihara was not here. Just because there is a Vihara Yatae, he had used it as a monastery. Now, recently, Professor Harry Falk has tried to translate it in a totally different manner. He reads it as the king, who is called Piyadasi, came to this place on a pleasure tour while he was still a ruling prince living together with his unwedded consort. So there is no indication in the whole inscription other than Samvasa, which he's taking as Samavasa. But there is no long A for Vasa, it's not Samavasa, it's Samvasa. So now, let me tell you that what does it actually mean? It's very simple. Piyadasi Namaraja, the king named Piyadasi, who came to the place of called Manemadesh, and here who was ruling, the Kumar or the prince or the person who's intergovernor of the place, his name is Samvasa, and he has come on a Vihara Yatra. What exactly is a Vihara Yatra? Vihara Yatra, according to Ashokan inscription, Ashoka does not promote Vihara Yatra at all. He says people should not go on Vihara Yatra, rather they should go on Dharma Yatra. Dharma Yatra actually is the religious pilgrimages. So you should not go on pleasure tours, but you should go on Dharma Yatras. So a person who is actually not promoting Vihara Yatra on the end of his pilgrimage, why will he mention about his own Vihara Yatra? So there is a big contradiction. Definitely this inscription does not belong to Ashoka himself. He has not engraved this inscription. It probably was engraved by some, that is the Kumar of this place, who wanted to say that this below inscription which is there, the inscription below, was engraved by Ashoka when he was on the Vihara Yatra. Now again contradictory. Ashoka had finished his pilgrimage. So pilgrimage would be Dhamma Yatra. So end of the pilgrimage, now he is there on the pleasure tour. This is just to indicate that his Dhamma Yatra has ended and now he is on a pleasure tour. The book which I was talking about by Patrick Oliver, an excellent book, this mentions that Patrick himself says, I could, probably should have used Piyadasi in the title of this book. The name of the book should have been Piyadasi, but then nobody would have known whom I was talking about. The victory of Ashoka over Piyadasi is total and irreversible, because we have been listening and we have been reading about Ashoka ever since the beginning of the reading of Indian history. So how can we change this name? This is a major thing. So that is why I have given the title Piyadasi Alias Asoka. It is high time that we start calling him Piyadasi. Now, I will just move from this topic and would like to mention that Ashokan edicts, as I've said, that so many books have been written and still scholars prefer to write on Ashoka. We have the book by Raghunath Thapar, then we have the book by so many others like Harry Falk's book. Then we have a book by Patrick Oliver. Recently, we have by Herman Deacon. So people have not stopped writing the books on Ashoka. Still, we continue. And of course, my next book will be on that. So this is again something that even we are not in a position to say that we know everything. And this comes from the statement given by Richard Solomon, who is one of the best epigraphists we have. He mentions, despite having been intensively studied for over a century and a half, the Ashokan inscriptions remain problematic in several respects, and many points of interpretation are still controversial. So we go on and on with the interpretations, and we keep on discovering new Ashokas, so multiple Ashokas. So let us now talk about the Ashoka of the Ashokan inscriptions. So he was engraving his royal messages all over, as we have seen, and he was communicating with different levels of audiences. And at the same time, he was conscious that whatever he is communicating is for the posterity as well and for the future generations as well. So just imagine a time when people did not even know how to read and write. Most of the people or the masses for whom he is writing cannot even read. He definitely made arrangements for the edicts to be heard. And that's why in the edicts we get the term Sotaviya. The edicts are to be heard, Sotaviya. So he's also mentioning that it is for the long-lasting effect of the edicts, that is Chiram Tisteya. He realized the importance of the power of the written words, which no doubt excel over the power of the oral order. And look at the vision, the farsightedness of this emperor. Still he is being heard. We are still listening to his voices, multiple voices, at least from his edicts. So, but we have to remember that we are only looking at what he tried to communicate about himself. So it's again one kind of a limitation. We know only about Ashoka from his edicts and how he wanted him to be known to the posterity. So recourse to writing helped in the consolidation of the state administration and communication with distant areas. And the one which I actually want to mention is this power of communication. And this was no doubt a highly successful idea. But what is success? What is the success rate of an idea? This comes when the idea is emulated by others. That is what we say it's successful. So whatever Ashoka did, if the later kings would have emulated it, they would have put it into practice, then we'll say it's a brilliant idea. Though he has been successful in communicating, we are still communicating with his edicts. But see, nobody in the whole subcontinent took this idea and carried it forth. So everybody was actually issuing edicts, not edicts, only inscriptions, maybe in the form of eulogies, maybe in the form of land grants, but they were not trying to issue any kind of edicts, or they were not trying to issue orders in multiple, what Ashoka had done. So is Piyadasi alone who had thought about the afterlife existence of the patron's act or the voice? Because, in the Ashokan edicts, we get in the Pillar Edict 7, he uses a term Achandamasudiyam, that is, till the sun and the moon last, it should last. This long-lasting effect was thought by him, and it continued in several inscriptions later on, this whole idea, and his own grandson Dasharatha uses it in the Nagarjuni cave inscription. So this long-lasting effect was something very, very interesting. Now, coming to the issue of, as I have already mentioned, that the minor edicts were dispersed everywhere throughout his empire, and the major edicts were on the borders of the empire, which actually defines the extent of his empire. But there are two edicts which we do not put into the category of the major edicts. We call them separate edicts because these are not a part of the 14 set of major rock edicts. These are separate. They are found in Dhauli and Jawgad in Odisha. Now you can see on the map here in Dhali and Jaugarh, we have the separate edicts, but they were called Kalinga edicts because they were found from Dhali and Jaugarh. But when they were discovered from Sannati, we stopped calling them Kalinga edicts because they were no more limited to the area of Kalinga, and we started calling them separate edicts. And DC Sarkar said we should call them 15 and 16 because there's a set of 14. To that it was added, so we should call them 15 and 16. But definitely we cannot call them 15 and 16 because these were not a part of the Ashokan scheme. Now, something very interesting happens with the separate edicts. The set of 14 which he was communicating throughout his empire from Afghanistan till Karnataka, he wanted to omit a few edicts at Dhali and Jaugarh. So when you look at the edicts, this was a very conscious decision. He wanted to omit 11, 12, and 13 at Dhali and Jaugarh. And at Sannati, he thought of communicating these, but he thought of not communicating the 13th rock edict. Now, let us just discuss it in a little detail. This is the site of Dhali, where when you look at the site, it's a beautiful profile of the head of the elephant. And then below that, you have a space where the edicts were engraved. So this yellow space, which I have marked with a highlighter, is the space which was actually the surface was prepared to engrave the edicts, to incise the edicts. And to this later, this additional portion was added. It was prepared later on. So there is a major difference you can see. This was not a very good prepared portion. So here you have the 14 sets minus 11, 12, and 13. So rock edict 1 to 6 and 7 to 10, then you drop 11, 12, 13, and straight away come to the last one, that is 14. So this space was available, this extra space was available. So this here we have the separate edict 2, once again, which is a misnomer, because this is the prime location which is actually at the eye level and anybody can read it. Here when the first edict came, the next one, it was engraved. So we should call this the separate edict 1. And the separate edict 1 here should be called separate edict 2. But there is a problem of doing it because already it has been published. So it will create a lot of confusion. But while doing this, we should always remember that this came first and this came next. Now, what do I mean by this? But before that, let me just mention, why is he omitting certain edicts? Because when we look at Rock Edict 11, this is omitted in Dhali and Jaugarh as this edict is concerned with the practice of morality. It speaks about Dhamma, the benefits of practicing Dhamma. And Ashoka mentions that we should have proper courtesy to slaves and servants, obedience to mother, father, liberality to friends, acquaintances, and relatives, and to Brahmanas and Shamanas. And there should be abstention from killing animals. So at Dhali and Jaugarh, where we had the Kalinga War, how could an emperor proclaim that you should not kill animals, where he has already killed so many human beings? So this was to be omitted, and this would remind them of the consequences of the aftermath of the war. So this was, and moreover, lot of people were actually enslaved and deported from Kalinga. So here he says there should be proper courtesy to slaves and servants, which is not possible. So this was to be omitted, a very conscious decision to omit this edict. Now, when we look at the Rock Edict 12, here, this has a direct and an empathetic plea for toleration among various sects. So this also had to be omitted because in a newly acquired territory after war, you cannot do this. So this rock edict is omitted in Dhali and Jaugarh, but has been included in Sannati because Sannati was in far south, down south in Karnataka, and here he had already sent the Brahmanas, the clerks, the scribes, and elephant riders. So you don't need to mention this there. Now, when we look at the issue of the exclusion of the 13th rock edict, where he talks about the Kalinga War, and how Brahmanas, innocent Brahmanas and Shamanas have been killed, and how others have been affected by this, the householders have been affected, and how people have suffered severely due to the war. So this is the reminder of the Kalinga War, and not only this, but the remorse which he had after the Kalinga War. How could he actually engrave it in Kalinga itself? So in such a condition, the emperor cannot put this proclamation there. So what I want to communicate is that the 11, 12, and 13, omitting them at Dholi and Jogger was a very conscious decision. But with this, I come to the issue that why was it actually avoided in Karnataka? Because the Kalinga War happened in Kalinga, not in Karnataka. So why did he omit Rockedict 13 in Sannati? This is a very major question. Now, the answer will be that when the people of Kalinga were enslaved and deported, they might have been deported to Sannati or in Karnataka, because we have the gold mines there, we have a lot of minerals and other activities going on. So definitely they were deported to this region, and they were not to be reminded of the Kalinga War and its aftermath, and definitely they would not like to listen to the remorse of the emperor here. Now, something very interesting about the site of Dholi and Jogger, as I mentioned, while doing the Jogger, where the engravers might have hailed from the northwestern part of the subcontinent, the engravers came probably from Afghanistan or Pakistan, where people were using a script which was written from right to left. So I'll come to this. Our researchers have shown that this was done because at Jogger, the name of the hillock is Khepingala. So he mentions the location, this location where the inscription is to be done. It's called Khepingala. Rocket Edict 1 of the Jogger version starts with Yang Dhammalipi, Khepingalasi Pavatasi. So when I mentioned that the engravers came from the northwest, how do I come to this conclusion? Because when you look at Jogger, there are two prepared surfaces, A and B, and it's a kind of a wall, notice board kind of a position. And in A, all the rocketics are engraved. So they initially prepared their portion and it was filled with the rocketics. Now, then when they prepared the B surface, here the separate edicts were engraved. And when you look at the position, they use the right corner. So whenever we are given a kind of a space to write, a page to write even, we will select the top left corner to write because we write from left to right. But here the engravers had chosen the right corner, the second edict also was written at the right corner. So they left the vacant space here, which is on the left portion. This shows that the engravers definitely hail from the northwest. And there are many more things which actually indicate towards that. When you look at the site of in Karnataka, you also find, this is the site of Sannati I'm talking about now. In Sannati, something very interesting happened, that the edict, here you can see there is a hole which was made much later, and this is the only edict of Ashoka which is engraved on the either sides. It's on a freestanding stone and engraved on either sides. When I mentioned rock edict, I said that it's usually on a huge boulder, on a solid boulder, it is engraved, but the edict of Sannati is engraved. The edicts are engraved on a freestanding stone. That means it has been transported from a far-off place, and they wanted to avoid the transportation of huge stones in large quantities. So they wrote it on either sides. So people have to go around and read it. So looking at the source actually gives us the context. So it is very important to read the text in its proper context. So why was the prepared surface left vacant? Because they were anticipating more future communications, and Rocket Edict 14 says that the emperor would send messages for incision in future as and when required. So of course we know that they had left the space for that purpose. Now, coming to this issue of epistolary tradition. As I mentioned about the latest book by Herman Tieken, when he is actually arguing about the epistolary tradition, like that each and every edict was actually in the form of a draft letter and then it was engraved. Definitely when you are sending the edicts, you have to write it in the form of written form, there has to be a draft. So this is not a letter, but only at one place we have it in the form of a letter, which is kind of a covering letter. According to K.R. Norman, the text intended to be inscribed were accompanied by cover letters containing instructions to officials. And even when we look at Arthashastra, it mentions that the scribe will compose and write the document after he has heard the oral order of the ruler. So the ruler will give the order in the oral version, and the scribe will just write it down. And he should listen with single-minded attention to the king's directive and then compose a document characterized by like the precision of the meaning. So you can even change the words according to the area. But where does this actually come from? It's a kind of a Greek tradition. Within royal chancery, an office was actually created for preparing drafts. So we are borrowing this idea from the Greek tradition, and we are thinking that we also had a similar epistolary tradition. But we have to be very careful by doing this. Now, I would like to raise a few questions on communication and miscommunication even. So, how did they actually avoid the errors? This is one question. Who authenticated the letters? If letters were written, who would actually sign them? Who would authenticate them? And what were the chances of miscommunication? What happened in case of miscommunication? Suppose there is a major mistake. How will they actually rectify it? So we will be just exploring this. But before exploring, let me tell you, we had seen the extreme down south, the end of the empire. We have the territory called Isila, which he says this is at the border of my territory. That is 3 sides, One is called Brahmagiri, the other is called Siddhapur, and the third is Jatingarameshwar. These 3 sites form the territory of Isila in Karnataka. All these 3 sites are in Karnataka. Here it's mentioned that the communication comes from Suvarnagiri, which is in Karnataka, of course, and at the word of the prince, because the word is from the Aryaputra. So Ashoka had stationed his son, the Aryaputra, the heir apparent, there in Suvarnagiri. And also it comes from the Mahamatras of Isila. And then it says that wish them good health. The Mahamatras of Ishtila are to be wished good health. And they are being told that Devananpiya actually has sent these messages. Then follows the normal thing. But at the end of the edict in Jatingarameshwar, Siddhapur and Brahmagiri, which is the Isila territory, we get the name of a person named Chapada, who has written. He authenticates it once in Brahmi and then in Kharoshti, which is again very interesting. Brahmi is the script which is used all over the empire, right from the north till down south, and in Afghanistan and the region now, which is Pakistan. In Pakistan, we find that Kharoshti was used for the Ashokan edicts, and in the northwestern part, we find Aramaic and Greek. There, people used to write from right to left. So Chapada writes in Kharoshti and signs it. So we definitely know that he hailed from the northwest. He signs one in Brahmi and again in like Kharoshti. So this is a portion which was not to be engraved on the Ashoka, like on the surface, So this has been engraved by mistake. So this is the authentication of the scribe, the Lipikara. So who is Chapada? He was the chief scribe, Lipikara. Now, later on we find in Rock Edict 14, which is the last major Rock Edict, that if there is an error, then it should be shouldered by the Lipikara, Lipikare Aparatha. So it's actually the Aparatha or the mistake the onus of the mistake lies on the Lipikara. Now look at the sites here. This is the extreme south where we get the sites of Brahmagiri, Jatingarameshwar and Siddhapura. Now this is the site of Jatingarameshwar where we get the authentication by Chapada, once in Brahmi and the other time in Kharoshti. So this is the portion I have highlighted which has the authentication in Kharoshti. Rest is in Brahmi. Now when you look at this at Brahmagiri, it's also the same, but something very interesting. If you remember that it begins with that when the order comes from Aryaputra, the heir apparent, and the Mahamatras, to the Mahamatras of Isila, the governing body of Isila, and the officials at Isila, you have to wish them good health first, and then you have to communicate the order. So this is written on this boulder at Brahmagiri, which is called Akshara Gundu, Mantra Gundu, and people still believe, Gundu means a rock, So they believe that it has Aksharas, so it's called Akshara Gundu, it's called Mantra Gundu. They believe that the washing of the rock will bring them good health. So the idea of good health kept on communicating because the edict had this. You have to wish them good health. The whole idea still kept on communicating, and it has reached till the recent times where people think that washing of the rock will bring them good health. This is the site of Siddhapur, where also we find the inscription. But something very interesting, in Isila, you find all the inscriptions written on the ground. Usually you do not find that in the rest of the places. Now, anyway, this is very important, as I say, that the texts have to be seen in their own context, or else you will not understand what is happening. So what happened when they encountered errors? That's what was my question. So one of the errors was engraving the portion which was not to be engraved, which was the authentication of Chapada. So definitely we agree that there was a covering letter which actually said how to just actually send an edict, how to get it engraved. So this was a covering letter which Chapra had written, which actually included the portion of the edict as well. So it's not only a covering letter, but the whole idea was communicated along with the edict. So a major error also occurred at Eragudi. I'll just show you the site. This is a site of Eragudi in Andhra Pradesh, where the minor rock edict and major rock edicts are also found. So it's a site where both the type of edicts are found. This is the minor rock edict, and you can see on this site map, the red one is the minor rock edict 1 and 2, and the rest are the major rock edicts set of 40. Now, something very interesting is that here, while engraving the minor rock edict, the engravers, not the scribe, the engravers had gone wrong, you know. At times they engraved from like left to right, and at times they engraved from right to left. All the blue lines are right to left, all the yellow lines are left to right. So they began doing it correctly, but then again they started from right to left. Some of the scholars had mentioned that this is a kind of a Bostophedan script that is going like a serpentine round. But this is not so, because you can see not every line starts with this, you know, it does not go serpentine. So these are the errors which happened. But I won't go into the detail of the error, how it happened and what happened, though I have publications on this. But now I would like to say that this is a major error which has happened, and nobody tried to rectify it. This is the earliest communication of minor rock edict. As I mentioned, that the minor rock edicts are first to be communicated by Ashoka much earlier than the major edicts. So when he was already sending the people to engrave the major rock edicts, why didn't they rectify it? Why didn't they chisel this off and just get a fresh one done? Because already it was done, and somebody would have noticed that the inscription is not engraved properly. They might have reported it, but definitely this was not chiseled off, and the rectification was not done because edicts were to be heard and not read, you know. So very few people could read it, and far down south, hardly anybody could read it other than the royal officials who came from the north. So these edicts were not read. There is another evidence to it. When we go to the site of Nittur, here you can see it's on the like ground that we have two huge boulders, and on these boulders, on the foothills, the inscription is engraved, and the engraver went round and round engraving the edicts from here till here, again then here till here. So it's very difficult to read, you know, and it's at the bottom of the rock. They did not even use the eye level to engrave the edict. So this was definitely not to be read right from the rock, but just the person who narrated it, most probably, like he was doing it by interpreting it in their own like local dialect, because the people will not understand Prakrit. So they had to do it. Now, there were many afterlives of the Ashokan edicts even. When we look at the book by Nayanjot Lahiri, the latest one on Ashoka, there she mentions as the last chapter, the epilogue, the emperor's afterlives, you know. And we can also have afterlives of the edicts, which is again very, very interesting, which is a kind of a rebirth of the edicts. I can talk about it later on. But then I would like to go into the site of Barabar in near Rajgir, and it's in Bihar right now. And here you have the hills, the Barabar hills, where you get the inscriptions of Ashoka. And let us just see that Ashoka was communicating his ideas to his immediate future generations. As I mentioned, he wants it to be long lasting. This Brahmi script did not undergo much changes till 1st century CE. So when in 1st century CE, people were looking at the inscriptions of Ashoka, they could read it. Why am I mentioning this? Because in 1st century CE at Hathi Gumfa in Odisha, we find an inscription of a ruler named Kharavela who mentioned that he had gone to Rajagriha and he had actually, his army, large army, had sacked Gorathagiri. So he mentions this term Gorathagiri, which are the Barabar hills in the Gaya district. And he says he had caused a lot of pressure on Rajgir by doing this. Now, where is Gorathagiri? So this is an inscription of Kharavela, which mentions about Gorathagiri. Kharavela was a ruler from Odisha, where the Kalinga War had happened. He had the memory of the Kalinga War. He wanted to take a revenge. And he also mentions that the Magadhans had, the Nanda rulers had carried the Kalinga Jina, so he had got it back. So this is something very interesting, that at Barabar, that is in Bihar, the site which I showed, you have this Lomar Rishi cave, and near the Lomar Rishi cave, you have a label inscription which reads Gorathagiri. So this is Gorathagiri. They labeled it. This is Gorathagiri. And just because of this, we know that Kharavela definitely had conquered this place. They reached up to Gorathagiri. So something is interesting, that at this location in Barabar, we find an eraser, when the Ashokan, this is the Ashokan inscription at Barabar in the Sudama cave, and this was engraved in the 12th year after his coronation. And here this eraser actually talks about a sect called Ajivikas, whom this caves were actually donated. So they wanted to erase something, and why? So these are the Barabar caves. Quickly, I'll just go through the photographs to tell you what happened. See, what is erased? Only Kubha, that is the cave, Dina, Ajivikehi. So they wanted to erase the Ajivikas because Kharavela was a Jain. And the Jains were not in good terms with the Ajivikas, and they did not want this Ajivika term. So any person who is erasing it intentionally should know how to read it. So definitely it has been done sometime when the Kharavela had visited this place. We do not know who did it exactly, Kharavela or one person from his army, but it could have been done there. Even in the another cave, here also you see only Ajivika has been intentionally erased. So the erasers are deliberate. So this brings us to the conclusion that it could be done only when it is read. Now, this example I had cited to show you that when you come to the site of Junagadh, Girnar, there you find in the western extremity where you have the major rock edicts. Here on the same boulder, you get the inscriptions of Ashoka and another inscription of 150 CE by Rudradaman, and then another inscription of the Gupta phase by Skandagupta using the same boulder. So the boulder was very important to them. But what is interesting is that the form of Ashokan Brahmi was legible, was understandable, was intelligible to Rudradaman in the 2nd century CE, whereas when the time of Skandagupta came, they could not read what is written in the Ashokan inscriptions, though they had lost that form, Brahmi had developed a lot. So Rudradaman mentions about this place as that of Lake Sudarshan. And he mentions that it was created by Chandragupta Maurya, the predecessor of Ashoka. Then he mentions about the minister who did it. He mentions about Ashoka, Ashokan minister who was a Yavana Tushashva who created conduits to this lake. And now the lake has been devastated by a flood again. And now he's repairing it. But what is interesting is not the history of Sudarshan Lake. Ashoka does not mention about the name of the place Sudarshan, whereas when we had seen in Jawgarh, he mentions the site as Kepingala. When we look at Barabar, he mentions the site as Khalatika. So here he does not mention it as the site of Sudarshana or Girinagara, but he only engraves the edicts here. He does not choose to mention the lake here. So there is no mention about the creation of the Sudarshan lake by Chandragupta Maurya or by Ashoka, addition of the conduits by Ashoka. So during the Mauryan phase. But from the time of Rudradaman, this came as an oral history, or maybe in the written form it was available. So he had the memory of each and every detail of the lake, which he mentions in his own edict, in his own inscription, not an edict. But what is interesting is he could read it, and the inscriptions only talked about Piyadasi and not about Ashoka. This is what I want to mention here. That when Rudradaman could read the inscription on the boulder where he is getting his own Prashasti engraved, he is reading that the name of the king is Piyadasi, not Ashoka. But he mentions this ruler as Ashoka, Chandragupta Maurya and then Ashoka. Why is he selecting this name then? If Ashoka did not want himself to be called Ashoka, then why is Rudradaman selecting this? Because this is the time when the text of Ashoka Vadan was created, and it had created a huge impact all over, and it was very popular gradually in the Silk Route. And so already by this 2nd century CE, the name Ashoka had picked up, and people forgot about Piyadasi. Now, again, I'll take you to the site of Sannati, where the adjacent site is Kanaganahalli, which has yielded the portrait of Ashoka. So here we had seen that at Sannati, this is the portrait of Ashoka, created much, much later when the Mahastupa of Kanaganahalli was created. And this Ashokan edict, which was found in the temple of Sannati, it's called the Chandrala Parameshwari temple at Sannati. Inside this, there was this deity who was sitting on the Ashokan inscription like this. So the Ashokan inscription, which is the only inscription in the subcontinent, which is written on a freestanding stone, engraved on the either sides, was a chance discovery when this image of Kalika was broken and it was replaced by a fresh image. When they had taken it out, below this hinge was the Ashokan inscription, which was damaged because they had created this hole to insert the hinge of the deity. Now the deity was sitting here, but they did not know that this is an Ashokan inscription. When they had used this freestanding stone, to them, it had some inscription which had an antique value, but they had not known the context of these inscriptions at all, or they would not have used this ever. Like, you have 3 generations of goddess. The first one is the Saptamatrika. The latest one is this one, which was replaced. And the third one is this one, which had yielded the Ashokan inscription. So I'm not going into the detail once again, but what I want to say is that the edict of Sannati is extremely important, which reached the said shed of Kanaganahalli and is preserved there. Here you remember that I'd mentioned the 13th rock edict was omitted because people would have been deported to this place from Kalinga and they did not want to remind them of the Kalinga war. But just after the rock edicts, the separate edicts were engraved. And of course, separate edict 2 came first. So first was the separate edict 2, which was engraved, and then separate edict 1, which I mentioned as a misnomer. Now, this I have already mentioned about the Akshara Gundu and the Mantra Gundu. So today, through this talk, what I have just tried to communicate is that things keep changing as and when we get more and more evidences. So today, through this platform, I would like to communicate this to the future generation that you have to keep the epigraphic tradition alive, and you have to read the inscriptions, understand the languages, multiple Prakrits, their dialects, and also you have to learn Brahmi, not only of the Ashokan, but the whole development, to read more and more inscriptions which are discovered every day almost from the Indian subcontinent. This is an art which we are losing very fast because you need the grip over language, you have to have the grip over the scripts, and then you have to have the grip over historical facts, and then you have to interpret the text in context. And what actually happens is the people who read the inscriptions do not go to the sites, and then they lose the context altogether. So the epigraphist has to reach to the sites. So this is a plea to the future generations that whenever you are doing epigraphic studies, you have to see the site, place the inscription in its original context, because the inscription has the voices. It also has certain silences. It says certain things and whispers, and you also have to read between lines. But definitely, the site also has several things to communicate. The voice of the site is also very important, which you have to actually like incorporate into the inscription, and then only you can contextualize a particular inscription. So I would like to rest my case by saying that let's stop calling him only Ashoka, though it's more popular, but let's have the courage to call him Piyadasi. And if we really want Ashoka with it, it should be Alias Ashoka. Thank you so much for a patient listening, and also for inviting me for this. There are several epigraphists who had actually burned their midnight oil. I would really like to thank each one of them from the bottom of my heart. And this art of epigraphy should actually continue. And of course, the Officers of Archaeological Survey of India and all the professors from whom I have been reading about Ashokan inscriptions, learning things, and also my research scholars, Shomita Chatterjee, who had been a part of the team Ashoka, and the people who were there. And also I would like to thank HKRDB, Hyderabad Karnataka Region Development Board, for allowing us to explore the sites in Karnataka in detail for a huge time. And thank you for a patient listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Susmita, for this wonderful talk. Without wasting much time, I will request Sharda to moderate the Q&A session. We have several questions in the chat box. Professor Susmita, you can also look into them while Sharda will help in selecting the questions.
Yeah, I would also like to see.
Yeah, so you can open the chat box, and meanwhile, I will just read out
Yes,
the question.
I have already.
Yeah, so I can read out the question for the benefit of all the listeners. So we will begin with the first one, which is by Rohit Datta. And he asks, could Piyadasi have used his inscriptions as a tool of political propaganda to counteract his reputation as a cruel person for cruelty?
Yeah, of course. So one by one, I'll just try to answer. Particularly this thing, it's not the case, when you look at the Ashokan inscription, each set has its own agenda. Of course, when he was engraving the minor rock edict, he does not even think about this, This is the first beginning of it. So he's trying to communicate a certain idea, as I mentioned, that his idea is communicating about the tour which he has taken, the 256 nights tour. This is one agenda, but of course, every other had an agenda. Like when you look at the major rock edicts, it's an agenda which he has taken. But remember that Piyadasi definitely used it as a kind of a political propaganda, because he had followed the Achaemenid model where Darius was actually engraving his edict as a kind of a popularity. And it's seen that even the voice of Darius still remains. Even after his death, so many years, it's still resonating. See, he wanted his own voice to resonate, and look at his farsightedness. It's really very interesting, But we cannot just think that it's only to counteract his reputation for cruelty. We do not even know that whether he was trying to do that. But definitely he had a vision, different kind of a vision altogether. So I will not go completely with this idea of counteracting, but he was using it to some extent, because the question comes from a very interesting place, because I have already mentioned that the conscious decision of avoiding them at certain places actually gives us the idea, how he was thinking. So the thought behind this was very interesting.
The second question is by Sunil Kumar, who asks, if his name was Ashoka and later there is the name Chand Ashoka, is it also a later interpolation by Buddhist hagiographers?
Thank you so much for this wonderful question, As I said in the beginning of my talk, that now we have to start thinking which Ashoka are we talking about. When we talk about Ashoka, we have to talk about which Ashoka are we talking about. But when we talk about Piyadasi, it's definitely the voice of the king himself from the edicts. So, the original voice is only of Piyadasi. And rest of the voices are of the Buddhist hagiographers. Of course, they are using it in a way, they are manipulating the whole thing, and they are also creating Chandashoka, Dharmashoka, and so many things have been interpolated. You are correct in mentioning this. So that's why I say it's a very interesting question, that these are the voices of the future, you can say, not contemporary to Ashoka. And then there were multiple with Buddhist agenda, of course. I agree with you completely.
The next question is by S.K. Aruni, who
Yeah.
asks that you mentioned that the Sannati edict was engraved and transported to Sannati, or rather it is mentioned so, but the stone is granite and it appears to be a local stone. How was it transported then?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. One thing, definitely I agree with it, that, see, first thing is that Piyadasi was genuinely remorseful. We do not know whether he was really remorseful, genuinely remorseful or not, but he was definitely remorseful. First ruler in the history of the whole subcontinent, or even in the history of the whole world, who expresses his remorse publicly. You usually don't see an emperor actually doing it publicly, after such devastation. So definitely he could not have released all of them, He was also worried about his own empire. And when you look at his policy towards the foresters, the Atavikas, he is not very, he does not have a very soft voice for the foresters. He says that they have to be in their own limits, or else he will be very strong he'll deal with them in a very strong manner. Though he has taken the path of non-violence, but still he will not forget that the foresters cannot go their own way. So here also we have to remember that the inhabitants of Kalinga country who had been deported to these places were actually not released from their captivity. Some of them definitely not. But when we read the edicts, every time there is the release of prisoners on his date of coronation, which is very interesting. So definitely some people would have been released from the captivity, but of course, he could not release all of them, because that would have created a kind of a commotion. So the other thing, when I talk about this rock, I agree with you completely, Dr. Arune, that the rock is local, but definitely it was brought from a little far off distance, and it is the only edict. We have to remember, the pattern of the Ashokan inscription, because when we look at all the other edicts, they are boulders, and we cannot say that at Sannati they did not have huge rocks. They would have so many of them, but still kind of a freestanding stone was used. It was created, it was polished, the surface was prepared, and then finally it was engraved on the either sides. And you can almost move around the edict rock and just read it on either side. So this is something which we should remember, actually.
So I think you managed to, through this answer, also answer a few other questions which are related to his remorse and especially the captives of Kalinga. So I think those questions are taken care of. This next one is interesting. This is by Meg Kalyana Sundaram, who asks that you have mentioned certain minor edicts that they were earlier than the others. So the question is, when and using what method were the rock edicts, either minor or major, first dated?
First?
Dated. So how do
dated. Okay, fine. So I'll just answer this very easily, it's something very interesting. Ashoka is a person, like Piyadasi, I should say now, of course, this I've been propagating for a long time. So Piyadasi actually is a person who uses a kind of a date pattern, you know. He mentions how many years from his coronation and post-coronation, you know, 1 year has elapsed from his coronation and then he starts dating them. So these many years, as I had shown the Barabar inscription where you saw that 12 years post-coronation. So this is 12 plus 1, 13 years post-coronation. He has actually engraved this edict. So this pattern gives us the date of each edict. But definitely when we see the minor rock edict, it mentions that it's from the time when he has become a Buddhist Upasaka, and we are aware of this, that the Kalinga, after the Kalinga war, he had, we do not know exactly whether he had become entered into the Sangha, but definitely an emperor who had a lot of control over the Buddhist Sangha. Because just imagine, he was a lay worshipper, he was not a monk, yet he actually told the monk which are the books they should read, how to control the Sangha. He was issuing schismatic. So it's very interesting that he's having a very strict control over the Buddhists. So a Buddhist monks are listening to an lay worshipper, Upasaka, who has just come into their Sangha. So this actually shows the power of the Emperor Piyadasi. This we should not forget. So the pattern in which he dates his edicts is his own pattern. You know, it's actually given by him, and that's why we know that the minor were the first to be incised, and then after that, which major edict was done on in which year. So the whole date pattern comes in. And the 27th regnal year is the last one. So thanks for this question once again, because it was a very conscious decision to begin the writing of his ethics and end the making of his edicts, because, you know, after 27th regnal year, he did not get any other edict engraved. So it was a project, a mega project of incising his voice on the stones, which he began and ended. And when he ended, it was the Pillar Edict 7, which is not found on the other things. There are 6 Pillar Edict sites, only in the Delhi Topra version, which was actually in Topra and moved to Delhi later on. I hope all of you are aware of the whole story, how Firoz Shah actually brought the pillar from Topra and Meerut to Delhi, and how it was transported by 42-wheeled cart, which was drawn by men, and how the pillar came all the way to the to Delhi. And so this was the pillar where we get the 7th pillar edict, which is an additional one. So this was a conscious decision of winding up of the project, where he almost gives the summary of everything. So the 7th pillar edicts becomes very interesting. So this is how we know that in the 27th regnal year, it came to an end. The whole mega project came to an end. So this from his 10th to the 27th. I hope I've answered your question. And thank you for raising this question.
So actually, we have a lot of questions, but I'm just taking the kind of new ones or interesting ones. So there's one by Mr. T.S. Subramaniam. He asks, how do you assess the importance of the inscription Raya Ashoka on the panel sculptures at Sannati, Kanaganahalli? Why has no other site yielded such short label inscriptions specifically referring to Ashoka by name?
Okay, thank you so much once again for this question. And of course, at Kanaganahalli, when you see the small, like low relief sculptures there was a need to put labels, you know. And there are some scholars who also would like to think that this is not Ashoka but someone else. But definitely this small label inscription of Raya Ashoka is our Piyadasi, you know. But in the memories of the people, it's something very interesting. The memory of Ashoka is at Kanaganahalli, where this has been done. So you do not get such label inscription elsewhere. Though there is another question here, not a question, but it's mentioned that the Sanchi Stupa also has depictions which has been identified as Ashoka. Of course, yes, it is, but it is not labeled once again. The way it has been labeled in Kanaganahalli, this shows the memory of the people. And let me tell you one very interesting thing at Kanaganahalli. There you get the depiction of the Barabar caves as well, Khalatika Parvat. And just imagine that the caves which were donated to the Ajivikas were actually in the memory of the Buddhist as a Buddhist site. And they engraved it there is a small thing like a stupa. So they imagined the Barabar caves like a stupa. So this is how memory gets distorted as it travels, So the person who had done it had not visited the place and could not read the inscriptions, that they were actually donated to a different religious sect altogether, who were not Buddhists, and the Buddhists did not like the Ajivikas at all. They were the contenders, of the Buddhists and the Jains. So they have taken Barabar as a Buddhist site, which is not. So this is how the memories get distorted. That's why I always say that it's very important to read the original inscription. Just listen to the sources, their voices, their whispers, and their silences as well. So that's it.
Okay, I see a lot of questions and many of them are quite long.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'll just, maybe we have time for another 2 or 3. Okay, so this one asks about the number 256.
Yeah, I get it. See, what is the current position among scholars today regarding the figure 256 appearing the words? There are many, there are multiple versions of this. Of course, this is the tour which he did actually, the pilgrimage of 256 nights, But I always like this whole thing that it's not 256 days, but it is 256 nights. An emperor, who had been traveling with the monks like a lay upasaka, leaving all his comforts of the royal life and doing this. So his nights were very important, how he spent the nights actually. So it's of course not related to the death of Buddha. This will create a lot of problem, it cannot be that. Of course, it is I will not go into this detail. It will again take at least 2 hours to explain this again. But this 256 nights only occurs in the minor rock edicts, And I would interpret it as the end of, as that is the only reason why I selected the Pangara edict and not anything else, where the Dharma Yatra, has not been mentioned. The Yatra which is mentioned is Vihara Yatra. And at that time, Vihara did not mean a monastery at all. The first time when the term Vihara occurs is not that early. So Vihara definitely was a pleasure tour. As we know that many Ashokan inscriptions mention the Vihara Yatra. So Ashoka himself says that don't go for Vihara Yatras. That is the pleasure tours. So here, this edict I had chosen because the additional inscription which says about the Vihara Yatra gives us the whole perspective that his 256 night journey is over, which was a dharmaya. So I think there is enough evidence to support this, that he went on a pilgrimage of 256 nights and that was over, and he he overstayed at this place, particularly this whole region of Madhya Pradesh. Here he would have stayed with the local Kumara, whom I believe was definitely Sangha according to me.
I'll just take one more question and then I think the rest of the questions can be emailed to you by the participants. So this is this is from Shikha, who asks regarding the audience in the landscape where these inscriptions were engraved. Could they have also affected the whole narrative of Ashoka or Piyadasi, as Julia Shaw mentions in her work at Sanchi?
See, most of the times, even the emperor was not aware, which place they are selecting. But at times they had to communicate, because this, I can say from my own experience, when it was Dhauli and Jogger, the name of the site was inserted in the edict. Like, this is Bingala. So you have to get it inserted in the text. So maybe at times it was communicated that we are getting this engraved here, but most of the times in the far off places, it was the Mahamatras who took the decision of having it. And even you have to communicate it to the people that this is the Ashokan edict here. When you look at the sites which are very high up, like Palki Gundu, which is so high in the hill, there, how did they communicate? You know, there are post holes where you can put on flags, and then people will know, okay, there is an inscription over there. And he's asking for the people, for the Mahamatras to congregate there, go and listen to the edicts. So this is again very important. So that is something, like most of the times, particular site which was chosen was not even not known to the emperor himself, though the officials would have definitely known. So some conscious decisions and some, of course, not. But that's the only reason why I selected the Junagadh inscription, to show that even after the selection of the Sudarshan Lake, which was already there, which was so prominent, Chandragupta Maurya had created it, but still he does not think of mentioning it. Even once. He could have easily done it. So every site has a kind of a strategy. It communicates more than what is written. And that's why it's very, very important to see the locale of the site and what it says. Like if you don't see Nittur, how will you understand that it was only to be heard and not to be directly read from the rock surface? So of course, your question has a very important angle, but I would say that it's very difficult to say at this moment, and we cannot generalize this.
Yeah, I think maybe we can wrap up with this. I request all the other participants who have questions here to email it to ma'am, and I'm sure, or maybe they will be answered in another talk of yours, which they will get to hear.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to speak. And of course, there are many questions which in future I will answer, because now I'm just doing this book on Piyadasi Alias Asoka, which is also the title of my work. So the questions will be answered there. And thanks for raising such wonderful questions, and keep raising them so that I get more ideas to formulate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Susmita, for this wonderful talk. And it is always a great pleasure to listen to you, and also understanding various aspects of an emperor who really lived 2,300 years, that nearly. I mean, it's very difficult to even read his mind or even his actions with some fragmentary inscriptions. Anyways, it's a wonderful talk, and I really wish you a very best of luck for the forthcoming book. I hope we'll be seeing it very soon. And I thank all participants for sparing their time to join this lecture. And please join us for our next talk also in the next month. Thank you so much. Thank you, Sharada, Professor Michelle, Munka. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor.